So we all doing okay? Any questions before we begin? Quite a few topics to talk about. So I guess let's get right on into it then. We're all doing all right. Let's first talk about freedom of speech, because that is, at least in the US, it's a right that we get. How well does that right apply to the internet? Okay. Does it even apply? We'll try and answer that question. So we have that freedom of speech, right? That's part of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, yeah. Do we get that on the internet? Maybe, maybe not. The answer is yeah, pretty much. That applies pretty well to the internet. So that's good news. Yay. We can clap for that. But there have been, over the years, people have tried to take away speech from the internet. I'm sure we can think of several recent political themed topics to talk about, but just in general, there have been a lot of censorship laws specific to the internet and other things, just day-to-day life. They've all been passed. Usually the argument of the politician who's trying to get that thing passed is, oh, it's for the children, something like that. That's usually the easiest way to convince somebody that we should get rid of somebody's freedom of speech, just to protect the innocence of children or something like that. A lot of them end up getting thrown out in court because we have that right to freedom of speech, and that is protected. So a judge is going to strike down a law that's trying to infringe on that, which is cool, at least in the US. Also, kind of freedom of speech and anonymity, they go hand in hand. You should be allowed to say something, and you don't have to attach your name to that thing that you said if you don't want to. That is, for the most part, also protected in the US. But yeah, let's talk about this in depth. I think that is the plan for today. So let's first talk about censorship. People are trying to censor stuff on the internet. Sometimes it ends up working. Sometimes it doesn't. What does that mean even on the internet? What does it mean to censor something? Because I can just go to another website, find the same thing probably, right? How can you ban stuff happening on the internet? What's the equivalent of burning books or saying that you're not allowed to have this book in this library, something like that. So let's talk about probably the biggest place to censor stuff is a lot of the time in a search result, because that's usually how you find stuff on the internet, right? You go and you search for something and you click on the link on Google saying, okay, I want to learn more about this thing, take me there. So if you go to that, if you go straight to the search engine, you can keep people from learning about things, can't you? Because that's where they're going to go to look for them. So China, for example, has banned a lot of Western companies that allow freedom of speech. So like Facebook, for example. Facebook is banned in China. Wikipedia is banned in China. Google is banned in China. They don't... they'd prefer that their citizens did not have access to those websites. And so they block them. It's not too hard to unblock them with a VPN if you're tech savvy, but the majority of the population doesn't really, I'm sure, understand all that cool stuff. So effectively, all these websites are blocked, unless you're young and you know how to get around that stuff. So yeah, that's an interesting concept. You can just turn off part of the internet. That's one option. You can't get to the search engine if you can't go there. The website doesn't load. Alternatively, you could censor the search results, and that's something that used to be true. So Google used to have a google.cn, CN stands for China, and that website, google.cn, it followed Chinese law up until 2010, and they got rid of that particular website. Okay, and following Chinese law here means that any search result, like certain political things, stuff like that, anything that China wanted not shown on Google when you search for a keyword got taken down for google.cn. Anything the government wanted taken down, got taken down. Oops. Which is interesting. Google would respond to the requests from the government and okay, this news article, I'm not going to show that to any of my users who search for this topic on google.cn, which is crazy to think about. But the reason they kept google.cn around for a while, they eventually got rid of it and changed it to google.hk for Hong Kong because there was a bit more freedom there at the time, and now it's probably a bit similar. But the reason they did that is their argument was something like some access is better than no access at all, because it's a cat and mouse game. You find an article, the government doesn't want it, they have you take it down, another one pops up in its place, kind of like that. So eventually, maybe the users, if they search for a vague enough keyword, they'll find what they were looking for, really, and that hasn't gotten taken down yet or something. So that's kind of the argument there. Like, let's stick around. Let's see if we can give people some knowledge. Some access is better than no access, but that's still also an excuse because Google wanted money from the advertisements that would be shown in China, I'm sure. So there's a flip side to all of that. Are there any comments or questions about this kind of thing? It's all like I can't pretend to know what's happening at the highest levels of a foreign government, so it's all kind of speculation. But it's interesting to think about these things, I would say. So yeah, they do. I know that's a common thing. At least with the youth, they know how to get around stuff. But maybe the older generation is not too familiar with it. So yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. And it's interesting then that they just allow that at the same time. Like, okay, we're not going to block the VPNs then, because maybe that's what they would want to go after next. So Google.hk is a thing now. And maybe they're just, I don't know, if you think about the worst case scenario, maybe they're learning about what all the VPNs are so that they can make a list and block them in the case of something horrible happening. They can then turn them all off. So yeah, that's a fun idea, censoring search results in websites. That's a way to do stuff. You can get rid of pieces of the internet if you'd like. That's one way to have censorship on a digital place like the internet. The other option is a bit more heavy-handed of an option. You can just, if you own the infrastructure of the internet in your country, and a lot of governments do, you can just shut down the whole internet. That's another thing, okay? So countries have shut down the internet in response to civil unrest, so like widespread protests and things like that. Here are two examples. First of all, the reason why they do this is because they can control the internet. Like, they have access to all the internet pipes. There's no Comcast in Egypt, for example. It's all government owned. They have access to infrastructure. They provide the internet, and so they can control the internet. So you can just turn it off in your country if you'd like. So yeah, back in 2011, there was, I think you had the Arab Spring, and Egypt was a big part of that. There was the Egyptian Revolution. So the government, who was in power at the time, they, of course, wanted to stop the protesters and help keep them from congregating, right, and learning about where the next protest is going to be. So they shut down the internet in Egypt in 2011 back then, since that was how the protesters were communicating. Some chat app, Twitter, stuff like that was around back in the day, right? So you can just shut off the internet, and then people don't have access to it. It's a lot harder to do now thanks to, I forget what it's called, but you know that new satellite internet thing that the SpaceX people have come up with? That is going to make it a lot harder for this to happen, which is great, I think. That's really good news in terms of freedom and anti-censorship. So yeah, there's also the case of 2016. There was a coup in Turkey, and so the country didn't block the whole internet, but they turned off for a little bit all the places that the protesters were using to get together and plan stuff on. So they blocked Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of those Western companies that made it easy to talk to one another. Okay, and so that's interesting. So the people were using, the reason they turned off the internet is because people were using social media to organize. And so it's natural for somebody who doesn't want people to organize, and if they have control over the internet, they would want to turn it off. Okay? So that is very unfortunate, but a possibility. Yeah, those are some fancier examples. Any questions about this? Comments about these ideas? Yeah, censorship is alive and well on the internet. We'd like to think that we have a bit of a less censored internet in the U.S., but we're all biased. We're looking at it on the inside. Maybe that's not true as much as we think it is. Just want to get you thinking about this kind of stuff. So that's censorship. Let's next talk about anonymity. So we'd like to remain anonymous on the internet if we would like to. Like we can make a little Twitter handle. It doesn't have to include our name, right? Should people be allowed on the internet to be anonymous, to really not have their words be associated with their name? Crazy to think about. So there's definitely arguments for and against, and let's go through some of them. So the first argument, this is a fun example from the textbook, having to do with satellite map data. So a very interesting thing here. So South Korea, they have their equivalent of the White House. They call it the Blue House. That's where their president lives. And South Korea wanted Google, for example, on Google Maps, to gray out, to hide the presidential house, as well as power plants and military installations. They wanted those hidden from satellite views or just map views for safety purposes, because South Korea is not very, it's a little close to North Korea, right? And they're not too good of friends at the moment. So if you can discover the exact GPS coordinates of the presidential house by just looking on Google and pointing a missile there, I think they have some problems with that, right? That was their reasoning. So they wanted those places grayed out on Google Maps, and they kind of got it on the map view. You cannot see the presidential house on Google Maps if you zoom in. You have to switch to satellite view, and it's still there, but that's an interesting thing that ended up happening. I took these screenshots. So yeah, they wanted those hidden for safety purposes, because then just with a GPS-powered missile, you could figure out the coordinates of this important thing and attack it, which is maybe a very good case for anonymity, right? I don't want this shown on the map. Please don't tell anybody where it is. Though it is also, at least for the president's house, it's probably very common knowledge where it is. So there's definitely a tug of war there of ideas. But if we're not sure whether or not this is a good idea, we can always ask our boys. So let's see what would Kant say about this? What would Mill say about this? The argument that the government of South Korea gave, for example, was for safety. Is that good enough? So let's ask Kant. Kant would ask, should we always tell everyone where we are all the time? Is that necessary? Should we do that? Kant is all for individual rights, so I think Kant would say no. He would say it's fine, you can hide yourself. It's okay to go off grid and not tell people where you're going to be. Okay, it's okay to hide yourself. I shouldn't be required to tell my government everywhere I go my GPS location all the time. I shouldn't be required to put my house on Google Street View like they don't do in Germany, for example. So Kant would be all for that kind of stuff, for anonymity. Mill might, on the other hand, think differently. I think you could argue yes and no for Mill. Maybe safety is paramount. Like if the president dies, that would lead to horrible state and a war and things like that. So maybe it's best to hide these places from the maps, just for safety purposes and for the safety of not just the president, but maybe the entire country, stuff like that. But at the same time, you could argue no, I'm sure. You could think about individual rights, and just like Kant is, and say that's more important than just a couple people's safety, something like that. Okay, you really do have to weigh it And it's weird when human lives are involved, but I've already asked you that question, right? The trolley problem. Would you kill one person to save 50 kind of thing? So it is a question that you can ask, though. Is anonymity worth it in this case and other cases? Okay? Any questions or comments about this example? I just have a few examples for us today on this kind of stuff. All right. So, yeah, let's keep on trucking. So let's go back, way back when before the internet existed, and let's talk about anonymity back when our country was being founded. Let's talk about the Federalist Papers. Do you remember those from a history class? So or from the musical. So the Federalist Papers were written by 3 different people, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. And it's actually not the easiest thing to do to figure out which of the papers were written by who. There's still some controversy there, because the Federalist Papers were published anonymously. Back in the day, they were published anonymously. And so we've had anonymity around for a very, very long time, and it's been accepted. All right? They wanted to publish the Federalist Papers anonymously because they knew that they were popular people. They wanted the public to judge their ideas based on the worth of those ideas rather than the merits of like who they were, rather than like, oh, Hamilton wrote it, so maybe it's a good idea. No, they just wanted people to think about the ideas themselves, so that's why they published them anonymously. That was also just a common thing to do at the time. Just publish your ideas anonymously and have your idea be critiqued rather than the person. Okay? Doesn't matter who it came from if it was a good idea. So anonymity is kind of a backbone to our country, in a sense. These were the founding fathers, right? Writing it anonymously, wanting to remain anonymous. For similar reasons, back in the day, I don't know, like, do you still read Jane Eyre in English class in high school or something like that? A lot of women authors had to use pen names, pseudonyms, right? Because it was frowned upon for women to be writing books. And so another reason to want to be anonymous, and I'm sure that like the alternative was not publishing something, so that was obviously a net positive for the women who were writing, to be anonymous. So anonymity has been around for a while. It's more or less been thought of as a good idea, which is cool to think about. Does it apply to the internet? That's still an open question. But hopefully you're getting some ideas, at least in your mind, about these things. Any questions, comments about this kind of stuff? Because I have some interesting examples now that are kind of the flip side of this, maybe. Okay? So first option, this is a website. It's called CaliforniaBirthIndex.org. Have you heard of it before? No? Let's go there. Boop. You can search for, assuming it's going to load, you can search for anybody. If your parents were born in California, you could search for them. If you were born in 95 or sooner, you can search for yourself, like I'm on there. And it tells you information about these people, interestingly enough. And it keeps some information about who you might be related to. So like if you look up your parents' name and they have siblings, it'll say, possibly related to this, to that. There's a lot of information that was just taken and put into the public domain for people who were born in California. It's called CaliforniaBirthIndex.org. So go look up your parents or something if they were born in California. My grandma, her family is on it, but she is not herself on it for some reason. I don't know why. I have to ask her about that. So, yeah, that is an interesting website that puts a lot of information public. All right? So, one thing I did when I first taught this class is I looked up Phoebe Bridgers because I love her. I went to her concert 2 weeks ago. I'm wearing her shirt today for this lecture. Let's look her up. If you do, it will show you boop, her middle name, her birthday, the county that she was born in. Her brother is not on here because he was born after 95. But it would show him if he was there, if he was born earlier. Mother's maiden name. It shows that. And this is what I want to point out. Like, obviously, Phoebe is a very famous person, and her Wikipedia page has all this information now. But back in the day, when she was first getting started, her mother's maiden name was not on her Wikipedia page. That was not public information. But at the same time, it really was, because it was on here. So that kind of stuff that you would want to maybe keep to yourself has been made public. All these birth records are public knowledge in California, which is crazy to think about. Wow. And she just turned 28 too. Cool. Is this okay? Is this an infringement on your right to be anonymous? Like, if somebody knows your name, they can look you up. They can find out your siblings' names, your birthday, your mother's maiden name. Crazy. And every one of their birthdays, right? Is that all right? Think about that. Okay. Let's go even further. There is a website called hitta.se. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it just means find. SE stands for Sweden, so it's a Swedish website, and it's very similar to California Birth Index, but they went a little bit further. You can search for people again. Yay. And it's all in Swedish, of course. But let's look up some people. Let's look up the most common name in Sweden. That would be Lars Anderson. That's Swedish equivalent of like John Smith. So there's going to be a ton of them. So let's look for all the Larses in Sweden. You can search. Boop. There's quite a few stored on here, a couple thousand. And we have quite a few Larses. Bunch of different names. Let's try this one. We have a 64-year-old man named Lars Anderson. Let's click on him. Not only do we have his address, we have his phone number almost, with some 2 extra digits missing. I think we could guess it pretty easily if we had an international phone card. We could try all the different 99 possibilities of those last 2 numbers, right? We've got his address, more information. I can't read Swedish very well, but we've got, we know that his birthday is in 47 days if we'd like to send him a card to his address that's on the website right now. Apparently you have a name day as well, which is interesting. Like, maybe this is like a patron saint or something. Somebody named Lars he was named after. And I don't know why they're telling us about Halloween, but that's nice. So let's see if I can read this. I believe, yeah, this says that Lars lives together with somebody else. Maybe this is his wife? I'm not sure. But Lars is living in this address with somebody else because they have all the addresses saved. He's living with Lena. And we can click on her if we'd like, assuming this is a woman. I think that's a woman's name. Yeah, so crazy. All this information, public knowledge, that's Sweden for you. Is that okay? Is there a line somewhere in between these websites? Like, do we even like this one in the first place? That's weird. But then again, there's upsides to anonymity, right? There's definitely upsides as well as downsides. And so this is a great point for us to stop. And I'd like to give you a little mini debate. All right, so please go to the Written Ice page. I'll give you plenty of time. We got plenty of time today to think about this. Let's go to the Written Ice page, and you'll get together into your groups, your peer instruction groups. Remember the names of the number of your group. Let me clear it out for us. Boop. So, yeah, here's our debate. Should people be allowed to remain anonymous on the internet? And I'm going to split you up. So if you are an even-numbered group, you say yes. You say that anonymity is good. Let's come up with 2 good arguments for anonymity on the internet. If you are an odd-numbered group, you get to say that anonymity is bad. So please come up with 2 good arguments explaining why anonymity is a bad thing. Okay, so I'm forcing you to think in a way that maybe you don't think, but that's what I'd like you to do. So take, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes to write down some good arguments, more than 2 if you have time. You can come up with 3 or 4, more power to you. So yeah, that's the game I'd like you to play right now. Hopefully you'll come up with some interesting things to talk about as you're thinking about this. So take a few minutes. About 2 more minutes, get some ideas down. I hear good conversation. All right, that's my timer. Well, let's take a look at our ideas. Hopefully you had some good discussions. I heard some nice words coming from the groups, so that makes me happy. Let's see what we're thinking. All right, do we have any odd groups again? No. You guys are doing this on purpose. Is it easier to say anonymity is good, maybe? Who knows? Well, yeah, let's see our good ideas. It's good because you really say what you want to say without consequences. Yeah, that's a good idea. Kind of goes back to freedom of speech. Like, you have the right to say what you want to say. You shouldn't have to worry about consequences, right? Assuming you have that right. Good for personal safety. Like, no one can come attack you because they don't know your address. They don't know your real name. If you say something that is maybe something that is controversial, something like that. Yes, people should be allowed to remain anonymous because privacy is important. You don't want random people on the internet knowing who you are. Yeah, maybe for safety purposes, right? Also, yes, because access to personal information. Yeah, so this Group 20's argument was about safety, it seems. Bad intent, again, ideas of safety. If they're hackers, stalkers, anything like that, it would be best to make it as hard as possible for anybody who wants to know who you are to know who you are. Yeah. Allows people to express their ideas to others in a way that the ideas hold their own weight without having, yeah, so kind of like the Federalist Paper idea. That's exactly right. Have somebody judge your idea rather than you, okay? If anyone were to have access to your information, be safe, they'd be at risk, yeah, cyber attacks. So it seems like a lot of our arguments are about safety, yeah. Identity theft, back to the safety idea, I think. So those are some, yeah, those are great arguments for anonymity. You'd want, usually it helps you remain safe. It helps you when you're trying to like make it so that people only pay attention to what you're saying rather than you. Okay. What are some reasons though why anonymity could be bad? I think there's the flip side. You could also argue that there's safety reasons that you would not want anonymity, right? If you have somebody on Twitter saying that they're going to go kill somebody, you want to know who that person is so that you can go arrest them, right? So there's always a flip side to it. You can use that same safety argument against itself, I would think. So yeah, there are laws in the U.S. at least that allow for that kind of access. If somebody who is normally anonymous on Twitter, you can, like the law enforcement can ask for the IP records of the person who is tweeting, and then they can track them down that way, in theory. So again, safety, anonymity is bad. What are some other good reasons? Can we think of any? Why you wouldn't want anonymity? I think, I don't know if we're all on Reddit or anything, but people who are anonymous, who are behind a username that has nothing to do with their name, usually you can get a lot more angry. You can write harsher words to other people when you are anonymous, I would say. That's very common on the internet, right? People making fun of other people, bashing other people. That leads to some very toxic places, I would say. If you were required to associate your name with your words, it would be harder for that kind of toxicity to exist and to fester, right? So that would be another idea in my mind of why maybe anonymity isn't the greatest thing in the world. So yeah, great arguments, great ideas. Are there any questions about this? This is definitely something to think about. Okay, let's keep on trucking then. The next thing that I want to talk about is kind of different, but kind of not. It's called the open source movement. And when I say source, I mean source code, like a program. So this is about computer science. in that sense. So I'm talking about source code, open source. Open source just means that the source code is available and free. So yeah, I'll try and answer this question. Just say, like, I don't trust anybody on the internet. Everybody's anonymous. What if I don't trust anything that I'm using, like even the software that I'm running? And also, I don't want to pay for it. Well, I have a wonderful thing for you. We have the open source software movement. So Scratch, which we know and love, and Python, which we're about to learn, are both examples of open source software. They are absolutely available for free. Like, we didn't have to pay money to the Scratch people to use Scratch, and Python is a free download. We'll download it later. All that is free, and then also all the source code, that's what it means to be open source, all the source code behind Scratch, the whole website, and behind Python, the entire programming language and how it runs, that's all available for you to inspect if you would like, if you don't trust it, or for you to just build on top of. Like, you build your own version of Scratch with some extra stuff, another block that users can drag out. Or you could build on top of Python, make a fancy version of language, Python++ if you want to. And usually there is the concept of, like, they need to somehow make it so that you cannot take their code and sell it, because it's open source. It should be freely available always. And so there's a concept of a licensing system. So Scratch has a license, and it is called the GPL license, GPL version 2. That makes it so that when you change the code, if you do, you have to publish those changes that you make. So it always remains free. Anything that you build on top of is always free from then on. Everybody still gets the source code. So what was open source remains open source, kind of thing. And you could read the entire license. It's a lot of legalese, but it's useful to ensure that this stuff is going to remain free and available. Okay. Same with Python. Here are the Python releases. All of Python has always been open source, but they've changed the idea of the license. They've changed the license that they use over the years to be different kinds. And because the person who was in charge of Python moved to different companies that require different things, who knows? But yeah, the license kind of goes hand in hand. I encourage you to read one day if you have the time. Maybe if you're a pre-law major, that would be a great idea. Lots of logic in English words in a source code license. So yeah, that is open source software. There are plenty of other examples, like OBS, what I'm using to record right now. Completely open source. PowerPoint, that I'm using to show this lecture, absolutely not open source. That costs money. Luckily enough, the school is paying for us to use it, but nobody knows how PowerPoint is programmed. They don't have the source code. That's a commercial piece of software. Okay? So yeah, that is the flip side. Microsoft Office is a good example. Microsoft Office is called closed source because it's not. It's the opposite, right? It's closed source. There we go. And so there's some, like, you have your executable file that you double click to open PowerPoint. I think it's called powerpnt.exe. It's just a black box. We have no clue how it's programmed. Okay, for the most part. So yeah, that's the other side. Another very popular, very popular thing that's open source is Linux. The Linux operating system, the Linux kernel, I guess, is the real idea. So Linux, have we all heard of this word before? Should I take some time to explain it further? So it was made back in '91. It's an open source operating system. So Microsoft makes Windows. That's an operating system. It's a program that runs programs. Apple makes Mac OS. That's an operating system. Your phones have Android OS. That's the operating system. iOS, the operating system. So an operating system is just a program that runs other programs. It manages everything. So let's define it that way. An operating system is a program that runs other programs. It's in charge of your hardware and all that. Make sure nobody steps on anybody else. Okay. So yeah, an operating system, it runs programs first of all, of course. It manages memory. Make sure you never run out, unless there really is none left. It manages your files. Make sure none get accidentally deleted unless you tell it to. Things like that. That's what an operating system does. Okay. And for some reason, they use a penguin as the mascot of Linux. So that's fun. So yeah, Linux is used, actually, on every Android phone. So if you have an Android phone, they've built on top of Linux. And also pretty much every website that you connect to over the internet, the server that you're connecting to is running Linux. So like our class website, for example, backed by Linux. Probably every website that we've gone to, the server is running Linux. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Completely open source operating system. It makes it that's why everybody puts it on their servers, because they don't have to pay for it. And usually you buy a bunch of servers, hook them together. It would take a lot of money to buy a lot of copies of Microsoft Windows or something. So that's why we use it. So that's Linux. Open source. Linux goes hand in hand with a project called GNU. Okay, it's an interesting project. It's a recursive, if you've heard of that word. It's a recursive acronym. So GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix, which is funny to think about. And their mascot is a wildebeest, because the word for wildebeest is also spelled like this, but it's pronounced like with an N-Y, so new, if you want to talk about it that way. But this one is pronounced GNU, because they like that hard G. And usually, if you are a very, very pedantic person, you don't say that you're running Linux. You're running GNU/Linux, because Linux would kind of be nothing without GNU. So the GNU project, it's just a bunch of free software. It's all the stuff that Linux doesn't have and needed, extra things. It's used to power Linux. All right, you will, if you have not yet taken an actual major CSCI class, if you ever choose to take one, you're going to get very acquainted with Linux. If you take it here, at least, we're required to teach it to you, and all the GNU software that's on it. Okay, so yeah, that's GNU, the project. It was founded by a man named Richard Stallman. He is a very, very famous person in this idea of open source. Okay, it's a very big proponent, one of the very early proponents of open source software and open source code. So he has some very interesting beliefs as well. Stallman believes that every program should be free. Like Microsoft should not be selling Microsoft Office. That program should be available for free and should have its source code available for free. And he does not use any software that does not obey this idea. So he uses completely free software all the time. Okay? That is GNU. That is Linux. Technically, you've been associating with all of them because maybe you have an Android phone or maybe you connect it to a website. Okay? So open source is all about making it so that you can share things, making everything free, and having it remain free. So that's freedom, I would say. It's another side of freedom. You're not allowed to be anonymous if you change Linux. You are required by the software license to tell other people what you did and publish it, which is interesting. That's fun to think about. All right, I have one last little subtopic if we're ready for it. We good? All right, let's go back to intellectual property, because we talked about that before. And let's talk about it again in light of all the things we've learned today. So intellectual property is just a fancy long word. It's difficult. There are people that, like, you become a lawyer, you become an intellectual property lawyer. You have to learn so much. It's very difficult. So you could study this for the rest of your life if you wanted to. There are a ton of corner cases, so we definitely can't talk about all of it, but I'll share some pieces of it with you. So let's talk about intellectual property, the stuff that we can take and use on the internet. Okay? Let's talk about fair use first. Okay? And this is a very, very Interesting idea. The idea of fair use. It answers the question. There are laws about this. When should you be allowed to reuse a copyrighted work? So, like, can you just go take a photocopier and, like, print out a copy of your textbook a million times and give it to everybody else in the class? That kind of idea. Is that fair? So the US, surprisingly, is very utilitarian about fair use. You are allowed to copy stuff and disseminate it, even if it isn't your own work, if it's been copyrighted by somebody else, as long as you follow these two rules, okay? You shouldn't copy too much of that work, okay? And the use, the thing that you're, like, the point of you copying it, right, the reason you're copying it, that use shouldn't keep the creator of that work from making money, okay? So you got to give it away for free. So as long as you honor those rules, you are good to copy stuff. So, like, you can take not an entire textbook, but a chapter. I'm allowed to take a chapter out of a textbook, scan it, and give it to every one of you. That's called fair use. That's totally fair use, which is interesting to think about. I can't give you the whole book, but I can give you a chapter of anything if I own it. Which is really weird. It's very utilitarian, I would say. You'd think you'd get sued for that, but you don't. So examples, excerpts. Excerpts of a book reproduced for students. Have you ever had a professor do that before? Give you like a chapter of a book? I have. You can do that and you won't get sued for it. Give it away for free, or if they print it out, like they can charge you for the cost of the printing, but they can't make money from it. You can also reproduce without having to get a license or buying the rights. You can reproduce a short amount, small amount of music. So, for example, if you have music playing in your YouTube video, you will not get a copyright strike if it's under 30 seconds long, something like that. Doesn't matter what piece of music it is. That's fair use. You're allowed to just talk about it for a little bit. And so that's why all the, what's it called? That's why reaction videos are a thing as well. That's fair use. It's very interesting to think about. So those are some kind of rules that don't make a whole lot of sense, I would say. It seems like you would get sued for doing these things, but there are laws on the books that keep you from getting hurt by doing these things. That's fair use. All right? Any questions about that? It's fun to think about. All right. I have a game for us now. So let's play Is That Piracy? Here's our first example. You can shout out if you think it's piracy. You can raise your thumb up if you think it's piracy, or down if you think it's not piracy. Can you record a TV show? Is that piracy? Is that fair use? One person says no. One person says yes. What are ideas? That's my question to you. I'll tell you in a second. All right. The answer, as long as you're not selling it to other people, this is actually legal. Surprisingly legal. Broadcasters hate it. The very first example of this was when VHS recorders came out, way back in the day, back when there were tapes still, right? People could record the TV while they weren't there, and that was just peak technology for them back in the day. And the broadcasters hated that because they wanted you to be there at that time to watch the thing that they were getting money from the ads. You could just fast forward through the ads after you recorded it. Ooh. But no, that's been upheld. That's fair use. That's totally fine. And nowadays we have our little set-top boxes that have hard drives in them if we still have TVs. All that kind of stuff. So that's surprisingly legal. All right. Is that piracy number 2? Can you copy like a GameCube game or a Wii game using like a flash drive copier or a DVD burner, whatever medium it is? Is that legal? Is that fair use? Is that piracy? Yes or no? What do we think? That's a bit different. Yeah, that's a game is like something that takes hours to play, right? Maybe that's a different kind of idea. Yeah, it could be. So again, that's also fair use. Interesting. As long as it's for you. You can't give this to someone else at this point, because then you've taken money from people. But this is considered to be a backup of what you have, and that's absolutely allowed if that's your purpose for copying it. Not a problem. Because over time, like DVDs, for example, you can only play a DVD so many times before the bumps wear out. If you still have those. You can only read from a flash drive so many times before it gives out. That's interesting. So I think I gave this one away because I was too excited, but this is the part where it's not legal anymore. Okay, if you give that copy that you made of the game to your friend, that's not legal. It's for personal use. That is, at least for this one, that's what fair use is all about. Okay, but some things like copying a chapter of a textbook or of another book and giving that to somebody for free, even though it is someone else, that part is legal. Okay, it's a portion. Maybe you can try and make a portion of a game if that's ever possible. Maybe that would be held up in court. You can like share one level with somebody or something. Who knows? You'd have to hack the game for that though. So yeah, any questions about this? Or is any of this surprising to you? There are some weird laws that we have that protect us. All right. One nice thing, I just want to talk about it, that came from the idea of like being able to make copies of things, being able to save your games and stuff. There's something called reverse engineering. Maybe you've heard that term before, but maybe not in the context of computer science. And all reverse engineering means is it's the process of taking something apart to like see what's going on inside. It's like to see how it was made. You can look at the source code for something that doesn't have the source code released. You can look at the binary file and like see all the instructions that are there, all the CPU instructions that are encoded in that file. You're totally allowed to do that, and you can take it apart and like see how it works, just for personal use. And so that is fair use. Courts have ruled in favor of reverse engineering not games, but entire consoles. So we have the concept of emulators, if you've heard of those before. Emulator. That is a program that pretends that it's a piece of hardware. So it's like you're converting hardware into software. There are like Nintendo DS emulators. There are GameCube Wii emulators. Okay? Software that pretends that it's a Wii. Courts have ruled in favor of having that. And the reason they have is because the purpose of making those emulators, of copying that hardware, was to make new games, new creative works, which is protected under US copyright law. The whole point was not to like copy the hardware into software and then sell the emulator. Every emulator is free because of that. The purpose was to allow people to make brand new games for a console that's not sold anymore, which is kind of cool to think about. And so a very popular emulator that's in the works, it's very advanced. It's called Dolphin. Maybe you can look it up. It emulates the GameCube and the Wii. Maybe they've also included Switch stuff by now, but I'm not sure. So yeah, that's reverse engineering. Totally legal. You can make an emulator for your favorite pieces of hardware, and nobody will sue you for it, even if that hardware was copyrighted or patented or whatever the right word is. So feel free to look that up. You can make backups of the games that you have and play them in the emulator. All right, so that's reverse engineering. And then last couple of concepts before we go and I talk about your next essay. Got to remember to do that. Let's talk about DRM. DRM stands for Digital Rights Management, and I'll just tell you right now I'm not a big fan of it. So I'm going to be very biased when I talk about this slide. So what it is it's a collection of techniques that control uses of intellectual property in digital formats, which is weird to think about, but here's the gist of it. DRM is like a black box. You have like a movie or a game that you want to play. You have to ask the DRM for permission to play it or to use it or to watch it. Like, hey, can I use this? and then it checks. It's like, all right, yes, you own this, sure. Or, no, you stole this. I'm not letting you run it from somebody else. Okay, so that's DRM. That's what it does, and it seems like this is a good idea, right? The producer is allowed to control like who gets to use the thing that they're selling, which seems great. But there are some horrible downsides to this, in my opinion, that outweigh the upsides. So, for example, DRM used to be a big thing with video games. So when you open up a video game to play it, it needed to contact a server somewhere to just check that you owned the game. Okay? And when games get old and companies that made video games don't exist anymore, the servers go down. And you're now stuck with a game that you bought 10 years ago that you can't play anymore because the DRM server is not responding. So that's really unfortunate. That's one thing. And then textbooks also, you're not allowed to resell the textbooks that you buy virtually, are you? Because they're backed by DRM. They belong to you and only you, nobody else. And that's not something that makes sense at all in the real world, right? With a physical textbook, of course you can sell that back. Give it to somebody else. Can't resell a virtual textbook. But I do think it's a good idea if they're able to keep that server around for a while and just keep it alive, if that's ever possible, then maybe DRM is a great way to make sure that people aren't stealing your stuff. But until then, there are some downsides that are unfortunate. Any questions, comments about that? All right, 2 more slides. We got plenty of time. So, next idea is software patents. All right, let's talk about that. A patent, I don't know if you've seen it, but like there are patents for pieces of hardware, like the thing that would like take all the seeds out of cotton or something. That's something that's patented. All these machines, they get patented so that nobody else can copy your idea and take money away from you who built the thing, right? So there's a question about now software patents, because software is not tangible. There's nothing you can crank to run the software, right? Should you be allowed to patent something that you can't touch? Yeah. Should you be able to? Should you be allowed to patent intangible things? Is it a good idea to want to do this? Well, if it's a program that you made, you don't want other people to make it, right? You don't want them to steal your ideas from you and then sell it off to other people. But there are plenty of arguments for and against, and I encourage you to think about them. Now here's one of each. So an argument for software patents is, well, it helps the software creators get paid for what they made. Their software can't be copied very easily, can't get stolen. You can't just take somebody's idea and make it your own. Like you can't go make your own version of Microsoft Word with exactly the same buttons in the same place and all that. You get sued for that. It's patented. So that's an argument for, and you'd want that if you were making software for to sell yourself. An argument against, though, software, it's nothing tangible. You can't touch it. Software, a program, an algorithm is just an idea, right? Anybody should be allowed to learn something. Anybody should be allowed to think something, so they should be allowed to recreate your ideas. It's nothing special. There's nothing special about something that you can't touch, maybe. Okay? So those are the flip sides that I can think of, but there are more, and I want you to consider. Okay? And then finally, just getting back to intellectual property, fair use, all that stuff, just driving it home. Let's talk about search engines for our last slide of the day. When you search for something on Google, for example, they have to show you pieces of what you're searching for. Like you search for, I don't know, some political topic, some piece of news that had recently come out, and you want to learn more about it. You search Google for that topic, they need to show you sentences from that article, right? From all the articles that you're reading. So they have to copy that information, right? They have to show you those little snippets of what you're searching for to make sure, like, so that you can figure out which link to click on, right? You have your little search bar, little search button, your go button, and then it shows you a bunch of headlines with the keywords all bolded that you search for. So there's text from the article, from the web page, that you see on Google, and it's not Google that wrote those things. Okay? They're copying it. So that is one case where fair use is very, very important. They can take pieces of that article. They're not selling it to you. They're just making it so that you can click on that website and know that that's what you're getting. Very nice. And then finally, there's a search engine called Duckduckgo, if you haven't heard of it, and it's all about remaining anonymous. So Google likes to track the things that you search for. Duckduckgo famously does not save any of its searches that you make. They don't track you on the internet with what you search for. They don't make money that way, at least. So yeah, that is fair use, intellectual property, a lot of topics. Are there any questions about anything we talked about today? A lot of new ideas, or old ones that we haven't thought about much before, maybe. All right, so we have a essay due this week, so let's have a new one. This will be a 2-week essay, 750 words. So, it's about privacy and encryption. Hopefully you can use some of the things we talked about. So, here is my essay prompt for you, okay? So, back in the day, this is still a thing. It's not stopped. Customs officials, when you go to an airport, they are allowed to ask you, like you go to another country, they're allowed to ask you to unlock your phone before they let you in that country. Okay? That's a thing. And so I want you to write about that. What are your thoughts about the practice? Should it be always allowed? Should it always be the case that a customs official can go up to a random person who's trying to enter a country, ask them to unlock their phone so they can look through it? Should it be never allowed? Or should it be allowed in certain cases? Right? Try and qualify your statements. So explain your answer and definitely talk about both sides of the argument. Because if you pick a side, you can't argue well unless you talk about the arguments of the other side, right? I think we're getting used to that by now. So that is your prompt, and I'd like you to respond to it in 750 words at least, okay? For a citation requirement, I want you to pick and find 2 sources anywhere on the internet and cite them, okay? So 2 sources, please cite in your essay. 750 words, respond to the prompt. It's about privacy. Technically, it's also about encryption, because a phone, if you don't unlock it, it's backed by your little passcode, right? It's encrypted in a sense. So that's your next essay. It'll be due in 2 weeks. Any questions about that? All right, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. So